As we are not all of a single nature, so we also cannot have a single style in combat. Yet, all must nonetheless arise and be derived from one single basis. Joachim Meyer, The Art of Combat. Historical European martial arts. Join us as we delve into the truth of sword combat and break the misconceptions of this deadly art.
I'm Sean Oldham. I'm the instructor at the Okanagan Combat Guild. HEMA is Historical European Martial Arts, which is actually part of WMA, Western Martial Arts, which encompasses everything that's essentially not Eastern martial arts. Everything from like old English boxing and French kickboxing to modern day Olympic style fencing, cane fighting, and as well as historical European martial arts. There was a bunch of different schools and different teachers around who were just kind of doing their own thing, and a few of them decided to get together to create the HEMA Alliance, where they could all organize their thoughts and all of their interpretations and just bounce things off each other to get a better understanding of the martial art in general.
So, HEMA is the modern interpretation of historical sword fighting. The art itself has been brought to life by the historic manuals written by the masters of the day. These books were named Fechtbuch, or Fight Book. Now let's take a look at the weapon itself.
One of the biggest things that I've noticed in my life is that, and I've even been guilty of this too in the past, is the weight of an actual sword. Like a long sword itself, or you watch something like Braveheart and you've got, William Wallace hefting around this huge claymore that it looks like it's like 20 or 30 pounds. I mean, every sword was different, but it would range somewhere in the realm of like 2.5 pounds all the way up to 5 pounds. That right there is probably the biggest misconception. Typically with a sword, you've got the blade itself, and the blade will run all the way down through the handle and actually come out the end during the forging process. And that part's actually called the tang, the part that runs through all the pieces that make up the sword. Within the blade itself, you've got the fuller, which is the groove that runs all the way down it. That actually increases the flexibility and reduces the weight of the overall sword itself. You've got the guard that comes out, and that's what's going to protect your hands. Next, you've got the handle. The handle can have a wood core or a bone core, and then the pommel, which carries its name forward to, current fighting, where you're pommeling somebody or pummeling somebody. That's sort of the derivative of that. It's also a mainstay weapon on the battlefield. Most blacksmiths in medieval times and stuff like that, they actually would specialize, as a swordsmith or an armorsmith. They weren't just your run-of-the-mill, go from making a nail or like 100 nails to build a house to, I'm going to forge a sword. The skill and the craftsmanship that it took to make those swords back then, without the current technology, they didn't have belt sanders, they didn't have grinders. The skill required to make those swords is incredible, and there's nothing that compares to what they were doing back then.
We've examined the weapon behind this ancient art, but now let's take a look at some of the techniques behind it.
Another misconception is that sword fighting, there's not a lot of technique to it or anything. It's just you run and swinging your sword until the other person's dead. But really, it did require a lot of training, technique, and skill, and dedication to get good at this, and a lot of knowledge how somebody's body works, and kind of knowing what you're capable of doing with certain weapons. This isn't LARPing where you go out into the woods with a bunch of people with like fake weapons and stuff, and you throw beanbags at each other for your spells and keep track of how many hit points you have left. With European martial arts, It started off as defending yourself against like a mugger. If you're walking down the street and somebody tries to mug you, here's a technique for this attack, or the most common attack, which would be wrath attack. And it was just a simple parry and strike. Okay, so he's gonna swing, I'm gonna block. I'm gonna grab the back of his sword, twist down, and I'm gonna sit him behind his leg, put my sword up in his throat, I'm gonna throw him over my leg, and stab him. HEMA is a way of getting exercise. It's a way of connecting with your ancestry, because, you know, there's lots of Eastern martial arts that have been taught master to student, and the student becomes a new master and then teaches his students. It goes on like that, and it's an unbroken line. With European martial arts, there's a huge gap where swords became irrelevant when everybody had guns. So the last master died out, and for a long time there's nobody doing this, like fighting with swords and teaching it. So now it's been reconstructed from the manuals that are written by the masters. And these are masters from like Germany and Italy, so it's reconnecting with your own ancestry, because this is what your ancestors used to fight with, as opposed to going out and learning an Eastern martial art. And if you're not from Asia, then it's just kind of learning a martial art, but you don't have that ancestral connection to it. I'm gonna break one of the most common misconceptions of sword fighting, and this is it. I killed your father.
I killed your mother.
See, in real life, these conversations didn't happen because makes no sense to keep me pushing against the sword. We're getting nowhere here. Okay? That is for cinematic reasons, for people to have epic conversations in the fight. But in a real sword fight, so you strike there. If he's pushing hard, I'm just gonna step around and strike him in the head.
It seems there is a lot more to this deadly art than meets the eye. Ever since Bruce Lee, Asia's many martial arts have taken film by storm. But how do these compare to Europe's martial arts?
The majority, the bulk of my experience is Taekwondo and Hapkido, but I've tried most Eastern martial arts at one point or another.
I have very little martial art experience in Taekwondo and a little bit of in Aikido.
Presumably the masters from back then took what they learned from war, different situations like that, and tried to develop a way to defend yourself one-on-one, because there's a very good chance you would be carrying your sword around with you, and what happens if somebody attacks you. So they started kind of developing these styles of defense.
Well, that was actually one of the most striking things that I wasn't expecting, is that there is a lot of similarities, that there's a lot of technical aspect, there's a lot of footwork, there's a lot of legitimately practical application. It's not just swinging swords at each other and LARPing, essentially. It's actually a real martial art.
One master would come up with one style, and he would teach them or his students how to beat, people. Then a new master would come along and develop a style to beat them, and then another master would come along to develop a style to beat them, and it kind of went on like that. Although, if there were three styles, like A might be beaten by B and B might be beaten by C, but A might also be good against C, so you never know. It could become like a rock, paper, scissors thing for which style is better, because there were quite a few that were very different from each other and don't even look anywhere near the same. So completely different styles might be awesome against one person, but might be terrible against another.
In a lot of Eastern martial arts, you do see that. You see, the development of this style developed because of this style, because of this style, and it's exactly that. It's a counter for a counter for a counter. And that was another aspect that I was very much not expecting to see. What I was expecting to be just this heavy, kind of brutish, or make-believe. I was expecting it to either be very clunky or just silly. And the fact that it had that kind of aspect, that kind of complexity to it, but at the same time, followed rules of simplicity, that martial arts should have. A lot of similarities.
I've noticed some manuals teach almost just a basic self-defense course, teach you the basic guards, and it says if somebody attacks you this way, you defend this way and then hit them. Whereas some masters go into great detail about how to actually fight, and more like sparring, things like that, and teaching you how to fight against somebody who really knows what they're doing versus somebody just who happens to attack you and picked up a sword. So there's, like today, there seem to be kind of different styles, the more self-defense and the more fighting.
The art of sword fighting is indeed one of complexity and skill. We've examined it, from the weapon itself to the techniques and its origins. Now, we wonder how many more of these deadly arts are out there.
These are techniques on how to kill people. Generally in self-defense, but some of these are more like, there's in the manual, there's how to rob a peasant.
Using a dagger, what they would say to, or tell you to do, is take some of their skin and pinch it, and then thrust into that pinched skin, and what that would do is make them think that you've slit their throat, but all you've done is just pierce some flesh, and then while they're thinking they're dying because they feel pain on their throat and now blood's coming out, you can easily cut their purse strings, take what you want, take whatever they had with them, and yeah, way to rob them without actually killing them or really harming them very much.
It's about growing as a human being to a better person.